My name is Tom Lux. I'm with the Machinist District 751 Labor History Committee. Today's date is August 20th, 2014. And today we're going to talk with Linda Sims, who is a machinist retiree. And welcome, Linda. How are you today?
Hi.
Good. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family, where you grew up, and what it was like to grow up in a union family?
I originally was born in Wichita, Kansas, but thankfully my father transferred up to Seattle when I was a youngster in kindergarten. And union has always been a humongous influence in our family, that you just wouldn't think of not joining a union if you worked someplace that was unionized. So when I did go to work in 1978 for Boeing, I joined up as soon as possible. So I joined with 751, and that's the only place that I've ever worked in my lifetime. So for 34 and a half years, I was a 751 member.
So how did you end up working at Boeing? Was there any other place that you could have worked, or you just...
No, I got married very young, and for the first few years, my husband said that he didn't want me working, that he wanted me to be taking care of our 3 children. And as we kept on just living paycheck to paycheck, he finally said, why don't you see if your dad could help you get hired on at Boeing. So that's, it took several months, but finally I got a postcard in the mail saying, if you go to school for 2 weeks at Renton Vocational Technical School, then chances are, there's no guarantee, but chances are you'll get hired. And I got hired.
And your dad was Don Clemens, who was a business rep
Correct.
in our union.
Correct.
What shop did you hire into? What was the type of work that you first had?
I hired into 3440, which was AWACS, building the AWACS radome. The shell of the AWACS was built down in Auburn, where the big autoclaves were for advanced composite parts. And then it was shipped up to Seattle plant to have all the radar and all of the mechanics put into the shell that we built down in Auburn. And so AWACS radome was what I originally went into. My lead lady when I hired into AWACS was Diane Blondin, which as time and decades went along, Mark Blondin was just a child at the time that I started working for his mother, but then obviously he grew up and ended up being a shop steward for my dad, and then it went on from there. So I started out on a military project. Then when AWACS quit being built in the early 80s, then I went over to commercial side of the house of Boeing, and then I went back to military when I went into building the F-22 at plant, well, it was called DC, for Developmental Center. And then as 787 was being developed, then I went back to the commercial side. So I went back and forth between commercial and military.
And what type of work was this?
All of my work was with advanced composites. So I only built parts that was graphite, fiberglass, or Kevlar.
Did you do the hand layup? Or?
Yes, hand layup.
Oh. What did you obviously like that work?
Yes.
Can you explain to us a little bit some of the techniques that make that so special?
The techniques that made it so special was that we were building parts that historically were built with metal. But as Advanced Composites, Boeing made tremendous strides in proving that the parts could be as strong or stronger and have a lot less weight, so that the planes would be more fuel efficient, and that as the decades of working for Boeing went along, more and more percentage of the airplane was approved to have the parts built with advanced composites instead of the metal. So it was by accident that I went into advanced composites. The 2 weeks that I went for free at the school, I mean, Boeing got 2 weeks of my time for free to have me sent to school. All that I was taught at the school, I never used any of it because I learned how to drill, countersink, rivet, everything to do with metal, and I never worked with metal in 34 and a half years. I only worked with advanced composites.
Now, when you switched over to the 8-7 program, was that still at the developmental center?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so you didn't have to go up to Everett.
Nope, never went to Everett.
So, what union involvement did you have while you're in your working career?
I hired in 78. In 79, I did win the position of shop steward in AWACS. When I originally got into AWACS, they didn't have a shop steward, even though they were in an isolated room, because it had to be a clean room. You actually had to put your shoes through a brush machine so that no metal could be accidentally stuck into the layup in the radar, would pick up any blips. So it was a clean room. So the shop steward that was at the other end of the building that we were supposed to have to go to if there was an issue, I asked, could we have a shop steward in our closed off room? And so I guess it was for maybe 4.5 years that I was a steward. And then when they weren't getting enough orders for AWACS any longer, they discontinued building AWACS down in Auburn. And so 3440 was then dissolved. And when they years later started building AWACS again, they built it at the DC. So it never was built at Auburn anymore.
Mm-hmm. Were there any people who were involved with the union that had an influence on you, or?
Basically, my father was my biggest influence for union, but the interaction with the Whiteick family and the Blondin family has been a big positive influence in why union members have to hold together as a family unit themselves, because if union people don't help union people, the corporations are going to win, and so that was a big influence.